Hi, thank you very much for having me today to speak to you at the Geoscience Convention. And I'm here today to talk to you about Gender-Based Analysis Plus, or GBA Plus, and Socio-Economic Impact Assessments. So essentially, how can you conduct a GBA Plus impact assessment as part of your projects, and why is it important? So my name is Marcie Hawranik, and I'm the founder and president of Canadian Equality Consulting. And we are a consulting firm across Canada. I'm based in Calgary here, but we have consultants all across the country, and we work to help any type of workplace advance equity, diversity, and inclusion. So a lot of what we do is assisting with GBA Plus, with the Socio-Economic Impact Assessments. We work with government. We work with private sector companies and associations and universities. And we do a number of customized trainings and full-scale audits and workplace assessments as well. So thank you so much for having me here today. And let's jump into the presentation. So the key outcomes for today include a clear understanding, providing you all with a clear understanding of what GBA Plus is and how it is applied to your impact assessments, as well as a clear understanding of where GBA Plus came from and its role in the assessment of proposed projects, and an understanding of how GBA Plus requirements can be applied to projects. And it may seem kind of easy to understand how GBA Plus might be applied to a large project, but it can be a little more abstract to understand how it is applied to a really small scale project, like upgrading a pump station or replacing a small portion of an existing pipe. But by the end of this presentation today, I hope that that is more clear to you on exactly how you can do that. So we'll start by providing a quick overview of what Gender-Based Analysis Plus is, where it came from, the benefits of it, some clear components of it, and the methodology of it itself. And then we move into how can you integrate it into socioeconomic impact assessments, and what are the existing guidelines that are there to support you to do that. And then I'll share some examples and give you some best practices. So starting with what Gender-Based Analysis Plus, or GBA Plus, is, it's essentially an analytical tool. It takes an intersectional approach, and it's a tool that you can use to assess the effects of your work on diverse groups of people. And that it goes much more beyond just sex and gender, despite its name. And it's a great way that clearly identifies how you can reduce and prevent inequality. So where did it come from? So this chart nicely explains the history of GBA Plus. The Government of Canada first implemented GBA Plus in 1995, and that was after the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women and the Fourth World Conference for Women in Beijing. When it was first implemented and created, it was just called Gender-Based Analysis. And it wasn't until 2011 when it was rebranded and there was a plus sign added to signify that it's about much more than just sex and gender, and includes many other intersectional identity factors like race, ethnicity, age, geographic location, ability, and culture and religion, just to name a few. Now, the Government of Alberta first adopted it a bit later. And as you can see, more recently, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, in their calls to action in 2015, specifically had reference to GBA Plus, and also the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, and 2S LGBTQIA final report, had specific in the resource extraction and resource development section of the report, specifically recommended gender-based analysis in socioeconomic assessments and monitoring of reports for all proposed and operating extractive projects in or near Indigenous territories. So the support for this tool is really broad and widespread. It's from the Government of Canada. It's also consistent with international declarations and obligations. And then there's a strong national movement for it as well. And just building upon that, the momentum behind GBA Plus and EDI, or equity, diversity, and inclusion in general, we've seen it from changing demographics. There's high growth in seniors staying in the workforce. Indigenous and immigrant populations are really high in Calgary and in Alberta as well. There's more millennials entering the workforce, and all of these different groups have very different expectations on their workplaces and on each other. So diversity is a fact, and it's happening. There's also increased community awareness around inequality. And what I mean there is there's more public conversations and public dialogue around pay inequality, the wage gap, lack of diversity on boards or in politics, as well as public safety concerns around and harassment and violence around the Me Too movement, as well as more recently, Black Lives Matter. There's also persistent inequality in the resource sector, in resource extraction, development, and transportation. Visible minorities, women, and gender nonconforming people are often excluded in this sector in decision-making and leadership, in access and control over resources, labor market participation and economic security, and health, safety, and social resources. And these exclusions are amplified by race and ethnicity, ability, gender identity, and sexual orientation, just to name a few. There's also, as you saw in the previous slide, many different international and national obligations that by advancing GBA Plus and EDI will help satisfy those. And as always, there's always a desire to deliver effective, responsible, and efficient projects. And GBA Plus has been proven and shown to do that. And to elaborate on that, here are some of the more notable and documented benefits of GBA Plus. It results in enhanced decision-making, improved data, because you're now looking for identity disaggregated data, improved communications, greater effectiveness, greater staff engagement, it's cost-effective, and it can result in equality of opportunity. And those are all benefits that I've tracked and seen, as well as the Government of Canada. Now, the benefits of applying a more broad gender lens in general to resource projects, as documented by Oxfam and UNESCO, they have seen improved public participation, improved data and evidence, greater social license to operate, and overall, what benefits women benefits entire communities. So if you're familiar with GBA Plus, you've probably seen this image before. This is the GBA Plus intersectional identity factor flower. As you can see, sex and gender is very prominent. That's where they recommend you start your analysis. But then there's a number of other identity factors listed there that are just as important. And there's no hierarchy of identity factors. There's just an intention that a good place to start is by looking at sex and gender. Now, I like this image because it really illustrates effectively root causes. So if we start from the outside and work our way in, as an example, we can see there's colonization and historical forces, just as two examples on that outer system, and how that has played out in our history has led to racism, as an example, and ethnocentrism, and then that directly impacts indigeneity. So that inner green wheel illustrates those identity factors, similar to that last GBA Plus identity factor flower. That's what this inner green wheel is. And the inner circle, the white circle, about unique circumstances of power, privilege, and identity, infers that all of those different identity factors in that inner green wheel have a different amount of power or privilege or oppression linked to them because of then racism, ableism, or discrimination, an example, and then because of those larger systems and historical forces at play. So, as I mentioned, GBA Plus is this intersectional tool, and what that essentially means is that it encourages you to look at more than one identity factor at a time. So in your analysis, don't just look at women and men. Look at Indigenous women, or Indigenous men, or Indigenous women with a disability. It's wanting you to overlay and look at multiple identity factors at the same time. Because when you do that, when you look at multiple identity factors at the same time, you find really unique experiences and issues that you otherwise would never have been able to uncover nor effectively tackle or solve then. A core component of GBA Plus is also examining privilege, like you see in this image. So privilege is the idea that some groups have more power in society, more inherent rights or benefits, only because of the identity group that they belong to. So only because of their skin color. So these are unearned benefits. It's only because of their skin color, or maybe only because of their language, or maybe only because of their sexual orientation, as an example. So another core component of GBA Plus, and I'm going through these components pretty quickly, but if you have more questions or need information on any of these, please reach out to me anytime. I'm happy to chat with you more. So another core component is unconscious bias. And there's a key step in the GBA Plus process that is intended for you to examine your own assumptions and your own biases. So it's important to have a really good understanding of the theory and the application of unconscious bias in order to do an effective GBA Plus analysis. So essentially, unconscious bias is every single person has these unconscious biases in us. And GBA Plus helps us to detect what they are personally and what they are organizationally and in our projects to prevent it from affecting our work. We know that within the first 7 seconds of meeting a person, we can have developed a solid impression of who we think they are. And in only a 1/10 of a second, or the blink of an eye, we're able to determine traits like trustworthiness. And so the advantage of this system is because we have so many 11 million pieces of information at any time coming at us, the advantage is we're able to clearly prioritize and triage and filter them. We're able to detect if we're in danger very quickly. However, the disadvantage is it leads us to over-rely on snap judgments and stereotypes. And most often, these are completely false. So we often like to think that our work is neutral and affects everyone equally. But this is not true. Even if we're building a pipeline, we know that it is not neutral and it doesn't affect everyone equally, not just in the communities that are surrounding that pipeline and the demographics and the diversity within those communities, but also within those that are hired to work on the pipeline, and those that are hired to construct it, those that are hired to monitor it, and in its ongoing operation as well. So anytime a human is involved in any type of project, in any stage of the project, GBA Plus considerations can be applied. And GBA Plus in itself is an equity tool. So what that means, and this image effectively illustrates the meaning of equity. So if we look on the far left, the goal in all 3 images is for all 3 people to be able to view the soccer game. So in the first image on the left, those 3 people are treated exactly the same, and you can see it's pretty ineffective. The middle image is equitable treatment. So this is what a GBA Plus analysis will help you see in order to determine appropriate intervention. So GBA Plus helps you understand the unique needs of each of those 3 people, and then allows you to be able to better support them. And then in the third image, that is where the systemic barrier, which was the fence, was detected and has been completely removed. And that is essentially what equality is, or sometimes also known in the workplace, people talk about that as inclusion as well. So let's talk about exactly what GBA Plus is. So the ABCDEs are kind of 5 core guiding questions of a GBA Plus analysis. So in any GBA Plus analysis, you're always asking, what assumptions am I making? You're also asking, who could be left behind? Who am I consulting with? And how am I communicating? What are my research and data gaps? And also, how am I evaluating and how am I ensuring equality of opportunity? So in order to do this, you follow these key steps. You start by identifying what the issue is and who's your target population. What's the diversity within that population? Then you move into challenging your own assumptions. So what are some biases or stereotypes or narratives that you have about your target population, or that your organization has or your project has on this population? What are you assuming here? And then you move into gathering the facts, research and consultations. So what data is available to you? Is it disaggregated by identity factors? If it's not, how can you get that data? Do you have to do a survey? Do you have to reach out to local organizations that collect this data for you? There's plenty of options here. And then you move into developing options and making recommendations, and then monitoring and evaluating and adapting as needed, and communicate and document and be as transparent as possible throughout the entire process. So this is the typical from the Canada Energy Regulator process with project applications. So there's the early engagement phase. It may include pre-application meetings. Then you submit your application, which contains the impact assessments, and then there's the decision and follow-up and monitoring and compliance and enforcement. As noted in the filing manual, the depth of analysis, and that includes the GBA Plus analysis, should be commensurate with the nature of the project and the potential for effects. So essentially, it's tailored to the scale and the complexity of the project, the potential interactions and impacts, and the nature of the public interest. And we know public interest is very high on this topic. And it's also noted in the guidelines that GBA Plus must be applied in laying the foundation and in the very beginning of the assessment. And GBA Plus must be integrated throughout the entire assessment and used in every single decision-making process. So here are the guidelines as noted on the Impact Assessment Agency website, which is also linked from the Canadian Energy Regulator website. And essentially, to be successful, you have to integrate it into everything. So GBA Plus has to be clearly and fully part of the entire analysis. The findings should be described throughout the analysis and the impact statement, and it cannot be an attachment. So again, it's not supposed to be an addendum or an attachment. It has to be integrated throughout. So here's some examples of how this has been done internationally. The company Total had a project in Coahuasi in a Bolivia onshore gas project. The Guarani communities were under a system of servitude and forced labor until 2010. That was the surrounding community. And they found that the benefits of the project actually worsened conditions for the Indigenous women. The economic and social benefits worsened, particularly gender-based violence, and they resulted in making women more dependent on men. So just to give you a little bit more context, part of the project involved laying 150 kilometers of pipeline along a rugged route through steep hills. It included 4 wells and a treatment plant, and produces 11 million cubic meters of gas, nearly 11,200 barrels of condensate per day. That started in June 2019. So there were a number of interventions that they did, and some ongoing challenges. So they ended up creating a multidisciplinary project team to address gender-based violence. They launched an anti-gender-based violence program in neighboring communities. Ongoing challenges were a lack of access to education, as well as the legitimacy of the company actually doing this. They were seen as overly intrusive and actively trying to change traditional norms and impose Western culture on this community. And the social norms really limited the participation from women, and many people in the community raised concerns if women were actually able to participate in the project. So there were a number of opportunities that they saw. They worked on a national legal framework and worked to also help promote and educate the communities about it. They partnered with local organizations, which was very positive. And they created, all of their engagement was very participatory, and they used inclusive approaches. So they did not specifically use GBA+, but they applied a larger sort of gender lens. So the outcomes that they saw was that they ended up strengthening local government in the region. They produced an excellent study on gender-based violence. They built up the local capacity of women. They created a gender-based violence handbook on the legal framework and conducted many participatory workshops on this in the communities in the region. So there's many other examples. I don't have time to go into all of them today, but another example that you might want to look up was the Base Toliara project in southwest Madagascar from Base Resources. So there's another example in Canada, the Canada, Newfoundland and Labrador Offshore Petroleum Board, the Hebron project, Excel, Canada Properties has this project, the Hebron project, and they developed a gender equity and diversity program to address employment and business access for, at the time, they were only considering 4 designated groups. So GBA Plus is much broader than this, but this specific project really only looked at the 4 designated groups in the Employment Equity Act. But their analysis and the barriers that they were able to identify in this analysis produced some really interesting and innovative mitigation strategies that included specific gender-based sort of training and recruitment programs, brand new facilities and infrastructure being built that were to make sure that women were safe. They had targets and set like clear specific goals on the employment for women in the project, particularly in historically underrepresented areas. And they had a strict schedule and progress reports to the board. And they partnered with lots of local organizations in doing this, created scholarship and support programs to ensure the completion of training programs by underrepresented populations. And they did many more initiatives. So I really encourage you to look this project up for more information. So overall, to kind of summarize, what are some best practices on doing a GBA Plus impact assessment based on what we know from projects in Canada, but also what we've learned from international projects in other countries as well, is we know that for methodologies, there's numerous frameworks and methodologies for conducting a gender analysis and gender impact assessment. These elements of best practices that I'm sharing with you kind of pull together the commonalities of the best practices from several different methodologies and frameworks that can easily, that is applied to GBA Plus as well. So all of these different methodologies overall collect really good baseline information on the community that's disaggregated by identity factors. The second thing they do is they all discuss and analyze information collected with women and community members. So it's very participatory. The third is that they plan and agree to actions to avoid risk and to create a positive impact. So they plan for disruption and disagreement from the start and know how to avoid that. The fourth, they review and undertake ongoing consultation with women and community members throughout the life cycle of the project. GBA Plus is unique from other methodologies in that it really wants you to also examine power and privilege and disrupt harmful social norms and it's intersectional in nature, and that's what makes it a little more unique. Other best practices are related to ensuring that your GBA plus analysis, even on a small project, is participatory. So try to get as many different diverse populations at the table, at your decision-making tables as possible, and have input from community, build local partnerships in the GBA plus process, seek out gender disaggregated data if you can, or try to collect it yourself. Then also focus on the most marginalized. So with this intersectional analysis, not just, you know, oh, women are marginalized, but which women? Is it specific to Indigenous women? Is it Black women? Is it racialized women? And ensure their perspectives are being heard and included in the process. Examine power and privilege dynamics, and then determine how you will impact these dynamics. There's matrices out there that I'm happy to send you if you're interested, on asset ownership considerations and accessing resources and decision-making opportunities. So you can kind of map it out, the power dynamics and the social norms, in order to determine how you can intervene or impact. Transparency, foster trust. This fosters trust and shows everyone that the outcomes are evidence-based and fair. And ongoing and proactive exercise. So GBA plus needs to be integrated in all decisions and in all impact assessment steps. Create measurable goals and targets. GBA plus should be applied to every decision made to understand how it impacts diverse people. And plan for resistance. So establish procedures in place to guide you when you experience resistance in the project or from the local community, disrupting social norms or highlighting negative social norms and trying to play a role in impacting that can be hard and obviously uncomfortable. So plan for some resistance in that regard and how you're going to respond to that. And then also scope. GBA plus is literally applicable to everything. Even in a tiny project, at a minimum, what I would recommend is at least consult with local women serving organizations or Indigenous women or Indigenous serving organizations to determine the demographic and determine at the very least the full diversity demographics of the affected communities. And then let that data and information guide the remainder of the assessment and the depth of your scope. So at a minimum, also analyze the construction workers that you're hiring, the work camps, and determine if it would change any of the social or economic impacts. So I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, and I'm happy to send you more resources or continue the conversation. So thank you very much.